GM Ethember. My name is Josh Lee, and yeah, here to talk about app chains in the Interchain, and it's kind of relating it to the project that I'm currently building called Osmosis. And yeah, let's get started. Brief intro about me. I'm a co-founder at Osmosis, as well as Kepler Wallet. And right now, in case you don't know Osmosis, it's the largest Cosmos AMM right now. Currently has about $1.38 billion worth of TVL. And Kepler Wallet is the largest Cosmos wallet. You can think of it kind of like a MetaMask, but a little bit more IBC native, Interchain native. And yeah, I've been a Dogecoin fan since 2014. I still have my Doge that I bought in 2014. Planning on selling it on the 10-year anniversary. And yeah, I really got into crypto through knowing Cosmos. And that was about 2017. And it's been kind of a crazy, wild ride, seeing a lot of the things we kind of talked about now becoming reality and being able to build a lot of that. Yeah, I'm based in South Korea, and I also kind of consider myself a home for Indonesia as well. So shout out to all the Asian builders out there. And yeah, I'm personally a film camera enthusiast. So yeah, that's me. Ooh. Yeah, and what is Osmosis, right? I'll just give you guys a brief intro. I think it's better to just like actually talk about what it is, what it does, and more of a concrete example than just going into a very generalized description of what it is. But essentially, Osmosis is a DEX app chain. And let's get into kind of like what an app chain is. Oh, and before I get into it, this is kind of what like our UI looks like. We have cool characters. We have this cool scientist mixing all the fluids. We have Dogemosis and a lot of cool characters. So yeah. So app chain is, I think, what we started calling app chains, are what used to be called, I think, application-specific blockchains. And I just think it sounds a lot better, sounds a lot more approachable. And you know, when you're building blockchains, I think kind of have to think of it like a Swiss Army knife, right? Kind of have a smart contract platform, and that gives you all the tools to build the applications that you need. But you know, where smart contract platforms are right now, and a lot of the languages are, it does feel like a Swiss Army knife. So you get to do a lot of different things with the same set of tools. But at the same time, you know, each tool isn't very specialized, right? And we've seen different efforts of like being able to do more things, being able to do more specialized things. But there kind of comes a point where you can't really scale a Swiss Army knife, right? We can see this like ridiculous, I don't know, like 40 tool Swiss Army knife. But at that point, it's just kind of getting cumbersome. I think it becomes more of a annoyance than something that helps you build, right? And I think the entire idea of an app chain is, rather than trying to scale a very, you know, Swiss Army knife into a 40, 60 different tool, why can't we just go into this like specialized tools, right? I think Swiss Army knives is kind of what you want when you're stranded on like a deserted island, and you kind of need all these different tools. You don't care how sharp a knife is, and as long as you're able to get the job done, you can. But as applications become more complex and you want to do more things with your application to kind of set yourself apart from a lot of the competitors, you do end up requiring specialized tools. A Swiss Army knife's great when you're on a deserted island, but if you're maybe a car mechanic that needs to fix cars, you're not going to really want a wine opener that's like there. Going to need a lot more heavier tools, more tools that kind of fit your trade, right? And that's the entire notion of an app chain, is when you're able to kind of work on a lower level than just a very smart contract platform rules, where I think a lot of it kind of revolves around being a least common denominator, something that can fit everyone, but it's not necessarily specialized for one specific use case. And I think that's great because a lot of the composability and the network effect that comes from it, but as crypto applications become more complex and more advanced, we are going to see a lot more app chains. And for example, so we're building a DEX, and typically a lot of other DEXs, I think, end up having this, you know, how do you define a DEX, I think, is typically it's a set of smart contracts, and it's a front end that you can access, and maybe you'll have more than one front ends that you can access the DEX from. But for Osmosis, I think because we are an application-specific chain, we do kind of have a lot of these features baked into the blockchain that works together in synchrony with the application itself. And I'll go ahead and go into the example. And I just want to make sure that like, hey, just because you're doing Kepler wallet, you're trying to like own the entire stack. That's not the case. I think the future is where you kind of have a common app chain that's a blockchain that's tailored for your app, but you kind of have multiple front ends that have different user paths and multiple wallets and things like that. So kind of diversifying the user experience. And from an application standpoint, you're kind of able to maximize the blockchain's ability to tailor to your app. So I think best way to kind of show what's possible is actually just going into some of the examples of what's possible, right? So one of the things that you can do is like set custom fees for your apps. And right now, Osmosis, we don't charge any transaction fees on any type of transaction and things like that. And obviously, it's not sustainable in the long run. But because we're an app chain, there are kind of like few different ways we can tackle this rather than, hey, we have to move on to a new scaling solution or like a separate thing like that, where a lot of the logic of the AMM is baked into how the state machine works. So for example, we have an AMM, and when people swap, they pay swap fees, right? And whereas, if you're Uniswap on Ethereum, you're not going to be able to tell the miners, it's like, hey, I'm Uniswap. Can you make sure that all the Uniswap trades have 0 fees? You can't do that because you're kind of sharing that block space with a set of different applications. But because, we are our own chain, we could do something where like, hey, what if swap fees count as transaction fees, right? Like at the end of the day, it's a civil resistance mechanism to prevent, clogging up the block space too much, and maybe we can dynamically set, it's like, what is the minimum amount of fees that that the blockchain takes where you don't pay a transaction fee. And another example could be, hey, different type of transactions have different types of like different amount of importance in the blockchain. Because we're a cross-chain, like multi-chain DEX, we do have like IBC relayer transactions that are critical to keeping the DEX running and the infrastructure running. But could those fees have a cheaper price for each unit of gas than someone who's trying to do arbitrage transactions, who may be more willing to kind of pay for the transaction fees themselves? And maybe we want to incentivize more people to stake Osmo and increase the security of the network. And maybe one way that we could do that is like, hey, if you don't stake Osmo, that's fine. You're going to have to pay a transaction fee. But if you stake, you kind of get a discount on each unit of gas. So, and then the other thing is like Mempool-level encryption. Obviously, MEV has kind of been a big topic that everyone's been talking about. But I think everyone's been trying to kind of like approach it from an economic perspective where, hey, like how can we sell this block space, create an auction for it, or there's like amazing approaches such as CloudSwap. But I think it's like a lot of the economic solutions to MEV, while novel, the kind of like solving the issue at the fundamental level has been fairly underexplored. Probably because the amount of app chains out there hasn't been huge. But something that we're trying to do is when the user submits the transaction and it's sitting in the mempool, the contents of the transaction is completely encrypted, right? So if you don't know what the transaction is, you can't really front run that transaction. And that's something we can do because we are able to kind of modify how the logic of the mempool, logic of the consensus. And once there's actual consensus happening and it's finalized that this unknown transaction will be included and executed in this block, that's when the transaction gets decrypted, so then it can be ran by the state machine. So that's one of those like cool things that I think only app chains can do, whereas if you're kind of renting someone else's blockchain, you're not able to do. And one thing I'm super excited about that we're fingers crossed launching by the end of the month is Superfluid Staking. I won't get too deep into it because it is kind of a handful, but Superfluid Staking is kind of like what happens if you're able to kind of combine the staking logic, which tends to deal with the security of the blockchain and consensus, and the AMM logic that we also have. And we have liquid staking and things like that. And all that is you have your, let's say, ETH or Osmo. You kind of give it to a liquid staking platform. They stake it for you. They give you the voucher, and that voucher is one-to-one pegged to that base staking token, and you can use that in these different DeFi protocols so that the base staking coin won't be competing for different interest rates, high interest rates that are offered by DeFi. So you're able to stake while there's sufficient liquidity happening in DeFi. But the issue with kind of doing liquid staking and things like that is because of the network effect of fungibility and liquidity, you kind of end up having to centralize or choosing one specific liquid staking provider to kind of custody all these like staking coins, right? And right now, I just checked this yesterday, and that's the amount of like staked ETH that's staked through Lido Finance, and it's like there's nothing that's happening. Like you can't really run applications on ETH 2, but what if you could? And is it right that one liquid staking provider holds maybe 20-30% of all ETH in that one smart contract? And what are some of the potential risks that happen if something that happens like that? And what happens if the DAO token decides to kind of decide what the staked ETH will vote for in specific governance proposals or how the upgrade should happen? And that kind of divides up the you want the base asset to be kind of the governor of the blockchain, whereas once you kind of splitting that up into different applications, you end up creating different kind of central points of failure, and that's not what we want. So what we've thought of was like Superfluid idea. Let's turn this like staking derivatives on its head and just kind of try to do it backwards, because we are an AMM that's also a blockchain, right? And we have this thing called the Osmo Atom Pool, and Osmo is the staking token of Osmosis. And when you get this LP share, there is underlying redeemable Osmo that's like underneath that LP token. And what we've approached it as is, what if the user could actually take that LP token and stake it instead of this old flow of you get a voucher from a liquid staking provider and you put that into DeFi. We put that DeFi part first, and then we put that LP token part into the staking logic. So you're able to kind of maybe not get a full amount of Osmo that's in the liquidity pool, but you're also able to just increase the amount of Osmo that's backing the network security of our chain and things like that, which are, I think, some of the cool examples of what you can do with application-specific chains. And some of these like 3 use cases I've talked about, I think, are just like very small examples of what we've been able to explore as an AMM, as a DEX. But maybe you're trying to build a gaming chain, and what are some of the ways that you can integrate the logic of your application into the blockchain so that the user experience is a lot seamless. And maybe there are other things such as oracles and NFTs that we haven't explored, but at the same time, if you're trying to build something where an app chain could actually really provide you with advanced features that you weren't able to have previously. And now I have to get into this interchain part, because I think the first part of the app chain is how do you kind of allow your application to be more tailored, your blockchain to be more tailored with your application, but that doesn't solve the composability issue. And I think composability is obviously the biggest part of like building crypto networks and crypto ecosystems, where you have permissionless access to this one DeFi protocol from another DeFi protocol. But when everything is a different chain, obviously that becomes very difficult. And I think the idea of the interchain is the attempt at that, where we try to solve a scalability in a completely different manner, right? And then we try to also solve the composability with the blockchain interoperability layer. So I think what a lot of people have been doing is, going for this vertical scalability approach, or where it's like, hey, we have a faster EVM that can process more things because we have different consensus. But I think the Cosmos and the interchain approach has so far been, hey, rather than just having a faster EVM, why can't each chain have its own app chain that's very well tailored to their application, and let them talk to each other? So that's where IBC comes in. And 2 years ago when I was here, I think we were like, oh, it's going to come soon. It's now here and it's being used, so that's really exciting. But you can think of IBC as kind of that TCP/IP layer. So it's not like a very like advanced application protocol. It's just a very like basic protocol agnostic way of how do you transfer data from this one blockchain to the other, and be able to verify the actual the contents of the blocks and how do you prevent some of the risks involved. And we use like light clients to do a lot of these cross-chain verification, things like that. But it's a very rudimentary layer, and you can build a lot of things above it. But because these application-specific blockchains are able to talk to each other, that's how you get the composability, where and as well as the network effect of having different applications, as well as the kind of the scalability and being able to tailor your blockchain for your application as well. And yeah, so I think IBC is kind of that composability layer for app chains, where you get the benefit of being able to create an app chain while not missing out on the composability of being on a smart contract. And this was when Osmosis launched in June 2018. IBC is now live, and this is what the network looks like. So I'm sure a lot of you guys haven't heard some of these projects, but out here in Cosmos, we've just been really excited because every 1 week or 2 weeks, there's a new project launching. There's a new protocol that's enabling IBC, and then now in the background, there's a lot of work that's being worked on to use this IBC standard for not just Cosmos SDK chains, but things like Substrate and maybe fast finality EVM chains. There's a bridge to Ethereum coming that's here as well, multiple bridges to Ethereum. So I think it's a very Cosmos approach of solving a lot of these issues. And this has been like the 30-day IBC stats. And I think at the beginning of IBC, we weren't seeing a lot of uses. But now it's I feel like a lot of people are using IBC without even knowing that, like, hey, this is actually data that's hopping from one blockchain to another, and that's exactly where we want to be, right? Where you don't know that you're interacting with multiple chains, you're just interacting with this application that interacts in the background with a lot of these other blockchains. So yeah, our website is osmosis.zone. We have a cool-looking scientist that's mixing all these fluids, providing liquidity everywhere. So love for you to check that out. And we're also just very Cosmos-spirited. We're maximalism minimalist. We love to talk to kind of how different ecosystems are going about solving different problems. And yeah, not just about blockchain interoperability, but also human interoperability. So yeah, love to talk about more things. And if you happen to be looking for a job and you like blockchain interoperability and app chains, please come talk to us, and love to kind of talk to you more as well. So yeah, that's it, and thank you guys all.
Thank you, Josh.